Hi everyone, this is the SIG Cluster Lifecycle meeting of Tuesday the 24th of October 2017. And yeah, we have a couple of items already lined up in the agenda, and let's see what we should talk about. First out is Fabrizio.
Hi all, just a quick update on the reference doc and the mana page thread. Last week I had a meeting with SIG doc team. More or less everything is agreed. The main point is that it is necessary some manual work to publish documents. And the second, next week I will start implementing some PR to make this happen and have a live preview soon. And the last item is that for publishing man pages into the packages, the deb packages or YAM packages, it is not clear yet how we can manage this. That's all.
So yeah. I just I have a question in terms of like how we can release the man pages, because I think Robert, you commented on the doc about maybe we need to sync. So basically we're not generating man pages and releasing them for other Kubernetes components, but that's not really a deliberate choice. It's just because nobody's done it so far. So my question is like, what do we need to do? Like, do we need to sync with SIG release? Do we need to create more tooling to like generate man docs automatically? And like, what does that workflow look like, basically?
This is a good question. For me, for my knowledge now,
Sorry, Fabrizio, did you break up? I can't hear you.
I can't hear him anymore either.
Okay. Yeah, Fabrizio, I think your sound dropped. So if you want to maybe reconnect or something. So I think in terms of generating it doesn't like Cobra generate man docs for us or something like that, or do we need to create tooling to generate the man docs?
Cobra, there is a command that generates some files starting from Cobra, but then those files has to be copied into the packages, so into the folder that then we are transforming in the deb packages.
Right. Okay.
There's already tooling in the main repository to build man pages, and that's done as part of the all build. And we've released that like eons ago. The only thing that would need to be changed would be the spec updates to pull in the man pages from the build artifacts and whatever the deb packaging is as well.
So are we able to do that ourselves, or do we need to sync up with like the release team or something like that?
My plan is to, I talked with I think Jacob earlier this week, or last week, is to push all of those updates into the main Bazel build stuff, so it's picked up that way. And then in 110 timeframe, the release transitioning should occur so that the Bazel builds are online, and then every build that we build from mainline will be Bazel build, and all those artifacts that are published as part of that build should be pushed through the mainline. So I'm not planning to adapt Anago anytime soon to and the specs and everything else that's over there. My plan is to only invest in Bazel, because that's the new world order, and the build artifacts that are there.
Okay, cool. Fabrizio, are you happy with that? Like, so it seems like we need to ship it with Bazel.
I will have a look at these. What my takeaway is that it might be that in 1.9 only generate man page, but then we don't publish in the package because we wait for the bezel publish, for the bezel build. Is that right?
Yeah, you can still have the artifacts, have it all bundled together, doing it properly. And that's my plan, tentatively, is to fix the packaging as much as I can. So.
Okay, I will get in contact with you for this detail.
Robert, were you about to say something? Or?
Oh, I was thinking about talking. So, Tim, what you said, it sounds like we have man pages. They're just not part of the release. We are the ones that created the devs and RPMs initially for kubeadmin and Cuddle, right?
Yes.
It wasn't like the SIG CLI folks didn't create the kubectl RPM. We did that. So I think this was maybe just an oversight on our end when we created those RPMs of not bundling in the man pages if they already existed. Yes, they already existed for some time, and downstream we consumed them because Eric Paris did all that work a long time ago to auto build, and then everything slurps in those man pages. So the Fedora RPM slurps in the man pages. So. Okay. Yeah, I guess I was under the impression we didn't have any man pages to slurp in, but if we have them, then I think the gap is a lot smaller. And Phil commented on the doc saying that he would be happy if we added those in the other components. So I think there's both prior art and how to generate them, and relatively much smaller than I thought task to get them as part of our tests. So I think that shouldn't be too much work to get them in there. So that'd be great. Should we move to the next one, Lucas?
Yeah, I think we could start talking about AJ. Woo. So last week was the first time we actually agreed on a path forward, I think. So this was in the implementation, kubeadm AJ and implementation meeting on Wednesdays 9 PT. Well, actually, is it, Robert, what time is it for you now? Is it a daylight saving thing that has?
It hasn't changed here yet. I think the US is offset from Europe in terms of when.
So is it next week? Because I saw there was the calendar started looking strange. We'll have to check that up at least, because I think it changes next week. Well.
Yeah, it switches for us on November 5th. So I think it might switch for you a week early, and so next week would be weird, and then it would go back to be synchronized the following.
Okay, yeah, so at least, 9 a.m. PT, and on Wednesdays is this meeting, also tomorrow. What we said was we now have a unified proposal thanks to Fabrizio. Myself and Tim have written earlier and documents, and also other people in the community. Now we hopefully have one grand unified thing. We could check into the kubeadm repo. I think that's the plan, right? To not have it as a proposal in core, community, instead have it as a more kubeadm design doc. And then, Fabrizio's written out the UX here. So basically, kubeadm init as usual, kubeadm join just master and give it a master token for adding a second master, and then kubeadm join for nodes as usual. We'll use a self-hosted control plane. We'll use the etcd operator for external etcd operator for hosting etcd inside of the cluster on top of Kubernetes, and use secrets for distributing these certificates around the cluster. After some long conversations, and as we know, secrets isn't the securest method of distributing Kubernetes certificates, and we're working with SIGs to like lock things down. For example, Mike has a new authorizer mode that can force deny access to some resources, and we're gonna leverage that when, well, making sure that your ingress controller doesn't have access to your CA key in the cluster, right? So that's one thing. And also Jordan is working on the node authorizer, and Mike Menzigot. And basically it should be improved to not allow the node to add random valuable taint and labels to itself. Yeah, thanks, Matt. Please add the link to the meeting notes as well. Yeah, so basically, so it couldn't say somehow just that, well, I want to be a master and add the label and taint myself and get access automatically to the shared keys in the cluster. So such things, but still, after, well, discussing it for a long time, we agree that the user experience is going to be more benefit. Like having this nice user experience for the users is better than having a fully locked down secure cluster anyway. I mean, when with the current Kubernetes flow, we all know that having this token for adding a new node isn't the securest possible way we could do it, nor is registering the master in the cluster the securest way, because, well, anyone that could schedule there to the master basically has root access if it can access the host file system, for example. So instead, we'll go this like route with, well, it's going to be as secure as we can just make it, but at least it's going to be a really nice user experience where we can dynamically add masters as you like. Any comments? Something I missed?
Justin had brought up the concern earlier that he wanted to be able to start 3 masters sort of at the exact same time and let them sort of self-assemble into a cluster. It's not clear to me whether that's possible with this proposal or not.
Yeah, so actually I don't know if it's outlined in the proposal, but what's in my head is that we could run kubeadm init concurrently for all these three masters. We have to use external etcd. Well, obviously, that's the coordinating point, right? And also, like, if you distribute the certificates to be the same before you do this, everything's fine. And I think for this use case, that's a fair trade-off, right? You generate, like in the case of COPS or whatever such solution, you could generate the certificates, put them somewhere, like in a bucket or whatever that you feel is secure, then distribute all the masters with whatever technique, and then boot kubeadm init with external etcd. That, well, I haven't tested it, but it should work, and if it doesn't work, we'll have to fix it.
I see Justin's on the call. Justin, does that sound somewhat reasonable to you, or do you feel like there's a path forward here for COPS HA to adopt kubeadmin HA?
We'll see.
So
I like most of the ideas, and it sounds like it's a small tweak to do the last bit.
So I think to be clear is that we're not, just because we have an operator in place doesn't mean that we will prevent any other means by which you can connect to your etcd cluster. This is just to make it ease of use condition for the user story of out-of-the-box experience of not having to set up anything else externally, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think like for production workloads, we should only ever recommend probably on-host or external etcd. Like, as Tim said, this is purely pretty much just for ease of use, just to get the ball rolling kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess kubeadmin has sort of two purposes. One is ease of use, and the other is building block. And I want to make sure we're not overtraining on one at the expense of the other. And it's okay if we start with one, as long as we don't walk down a path that it's not possible to do both.
Yeah, so, well, it should be mentioned that everything we do here now, that we're planning to do, will be explicitly under feature gate and heavily locked down in an alpha, pre-alpha, maybe even state in 1.9. Then we'll see how it goes and maybe graduate to beta or whatever. And also we don't make any upgrading. Well, I don't think we will. We might, but I don't think we will have time to make upgrading promises that if you make a 1.9 cluster, you will be able to upgrade it to 1.10 if you're using AJ. Probably not. But we'll see. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
So is the operator going to be default? So if I'm a user and I've enabled the self-hosting feature flag, will it automatically deploy the operator, or do I need to enable another feature flag?
You have to enable explicitly the AJ feature flag for the etcd operator to be deployed. Yeah.
So if I enable self-hosting but don't enable the HA, then it's going to be static pods.
Sorry, that if you...
Sorry, if I enable self-hosting feature flag but not HA, etcd will just be static pods, correct?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Yep. That's the case, and that's what the default route of 1.9 is going to look like.
I would argue that we should make it very explicit what the etcd mode should be, because like every time we do defaults, we tend to have problems when those defaults change as versions evolve, right? But that's a nitpick, so.
Yeah, so one thing we'll have to do with, so now currently self-hosting is in alpha, right, in 1.8. We're aiming for it to be the default in 1.9, but at this time, yes, we have to do some kind of flag or setting where you can enable or opt out. Well, where you can disable self-hosting, that is. We'll have to see what the UX looks like there, but I think the same thing will be with AJ. Like, well, I want to spin up a cluster in 1.11 or something. I don't want to have AJ, and like some flag to opt out there as well. I think
with in the name of defaults, kind of echoing what Justin said, as default behavior changes, I think it should be like an opt-in kind of thing. Like KubeADM without these flags should always, till the end of time, behave the same. And then if we want to add something, it's an opt-in exercise. And that way we're not breaking backwards compatibility.
So are you saying we shouldn't make self-hosting the default in 1.9, or like,
I think
it's a general rule?
I think as a general rule, but like if it's greatly changing the behavior of the program, like, you know, KubeADM version in default should relatively be the same as KubeADM version in plus some number default.
Yeah, Robert, please.
I was going to say, at some point we have to change, right? And I think that the question is just when, right? Because you can't keep the behavior the same forever indefinitely, right? Because then you can never add new features as defaults. So I think the question is, how do you inform users that things are changing in the new version that they're running or across upgrades in a reasonable way? And I don't know if release notes might not be enough. We might need to build something into the program to say, like, by the way, the defaults are different, or especially during upgrades, I think we need to build that into the program. But I don't think we can compare ourselves to never changing default behavior, because then we won't be able to upgrade, right? Like, we could say, if the default was to install Kubernetes with etcd2, and we don't want to ever change default behavior, then you're stuck on etcd2 forever, even when it's well out of the support window.
Well, I mean, on that particular example, we did really mess up in API server, right? Where we changed the default and it was a disaster, and we agreed never to do that again. And so what we've said is that the the flag becomes mandatory if you expect people to change, right? And eventually we deprecate etcd2. We put warnings on etcd2. We eventually deprecate it. We remove it at that point. But you can make the flag mandatory if you want to change the behavior. And what we did with the etcd behavior change in API server was agreed to be an error and a violation of our principles. But we can certainly make flags mandatory to allow discovery, and we can put warnings up to allow discovery. But we shouldn't. Well, if kubeadm is going to have the same guarantees as Kubernetes, other Kubernetes CLI components, then it should not change defaults.
Well, kubeadm is beta still, so we might change it if we want.
You still have that get out of jail free card until.
This is your statement doesn't jive with the rest of the program. Like, there are changes and defaults that occur all across the system components, not just etcd. But like if you look at the kubelet changes defaults all the time, and this is no different from any release. But it happens in a well-defined process. Well, it happens in an ad hoc process. If it was more systematic across the whole program, people have some definition of well-defined within each individual component, but it's not consistent across the whole program. And now if we had consistency there, I think that would probably help to alleviate concerns, because we would have this well-versioned and well-thought-out process that everyone agrees to. But instead, it's a little ad hoc for how we change defaults.
Well, what's an example of that? Because like let's see if they didn't follow the rules, and we can.
Oh, the swap. The swap killed everybody. That was on by default in 1.8. That killed every single person who was running the kubelet, right? Like that. How many issues are open for that thing?
The swap.
In KubeSphere, at least 6.
6? I don't know how many issues we got, but in kubeadm, but there was
100 times as many.
Exactly. But that's an example right there.
But it sounds like what you're saying is we shouldn't change the flags because it breaks people, right?
No, I think we should have a well-defined, systematic way of doing these things.
Well, we do. We do have a way, which is we don't change the default to flags.
But that process doesn't allow for innovation that needs to occur.
It does. The process by which we change the flags is we say that the flag becomes mandatory. And
then we're gonna end up with, if you want to run Kubernetes, you have to specify these hundreds of flags, right? To all the features that actually belong to release.
So maybe there's an argument that kubeadm, which is user-facing, should have a different policy, but that is that we will then have the problems that we saw with kubelet and swap, which I wasn't aware of, and we'll see the problems which we saw with API server and etcd.
This is a meta problem that kind of goes beyond the scope. I think what we can do is I can take this forwards, I think, to both SIG architecture and possibly the steering committee to evaluate processes that we might want to refine, right? Or have me be more explicit. But I think that's kind of beyond the scope of this working group, at least at this point in time, other than we know we need to do a better job. Does that seem like a reasonable punt, at least for this moment in time?
Can we just take an action item to follow up on it in a future call?
That seems reasonable. I'll have to go to those other meetings, and I will outline them too. So
+1.
Cool. Thanks, Tim. What's the next thing? Cluster API. Woo.
So I put this in there both as a opportunity for me to give an update and also an opportunity to allow anybody else to give updates if they wanted to. Our last cluster API meeting, we decided that we were going to just merge in an alpha prototype into the kube-deploy repo. Looks like some folks over at Google went ahead and did that. I was just looking through the code earlier, and it looks like there's a working example of taking the cluster API, converting it to the kubecorn API, and then calling reconcile with that. Moving forward, I'm going to try to update kubecorn to actually speak the alpha version of the cluster API, and I'm going to try to bang out an Azure Node Controller pod that interprets that API as well, just to give us sort of some things we can play with and look at and see how they're behaving and see what we like and don't like. But those are my kind of updates on implementation of it. I don't know if anybody wants to speak to anything else.
Tim has a question.
I have a question. It's what's the time horizon for maturity of the cluster API, and will it be? Are folks going to commit to it and deliver on it? Because I'm interested, and I'd love to test it, but at the same time, cycles don't exist. And I'd rather test something that's been vetted a little more.
Yeah, so if you want to test something that's been vetted, you should just wait a little bit. I think if you're interested in helping sort of shape what the API looks like, you might take a look over the types.go files that are getting checked in for the different parts of the API, because even if you aren't ready to test it out or look at the implementation, like defining a good API is really important, right? So if you have any time to dedicate, I would do it there and make sure we're capturing the right requirements.
Could you link that in the doc, please?
Sure.
It should be underneath my my little heading there.
Yeah, so Chris has a link to where we're checking code in. There are a couple of open PRs. Jacob checked in the types for the node parts, but he also has an open PR where people are leaving comments. I know that Justin left a bunch of comments that he's addressing. So he has an open PR that if you want to comment on, but also some types checked in so we can start prototyping code against it. Chris also sent a PR, I believe, yesterday with sort of the first cut at the control plane part of the configuration. So again, if you're interested in that half of the cluster API, please take a look at that PR. And I'll link both of those into the notes. In terms of level of commitment from our side, I think we're very committed to sort of seeing this through and making this happen. In terms of time frame, the sort of thing right now is Chris and I are giving a talk about this at KubeCon. So we want to have enough progress and sort of demo ability for KubeCon, but it's really probably going to be sort of alpha sort of demo quality by the end of this year. And then once we sort of feel more confident in the shape of the API, we can start pushing it towards beta after that.
I think getting feedback from KubeCon and having a recorded presentation is going to be a really big step in moving to beta.
Cool. Just a nit. Is this work done? Well, the link here is Kubernetes, github.com/Kubernetes/kubedeploy 3 master cluster API. Are you envisioning to actually work on the Kubernetes, on a Kubernetes branch, like a feature branch, or is this? Oh well, it's merged already. Or
so the initial implementation of the cluster API is explicitly not part of core Kubernetes. We may reassess that later and decide it should become part of core, but as part of sort of the layering principles, if you look at Brian's architecture doc, cluster API is not inside of core. So the intent is not to ever put it inside of Kubernetes/Kubernetes repo.
Oh yeah, well,
graduates up, right? That's the other part of the process we haven't really well defined, is what happens if there's something outside of core that becomes, really useful, and we would like to sort of graduate into core. But we certainly we aren't starting with that as the intention.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Well, I just was unaware of that. Something had been merged already. Yeah, so looks good to me. I'm definitely interested in the cluster control plane API, as you know. So I'll take a look at. Well, are there any updates to the doc since the main proposal doc since I left my comments there?
Yes. So we've broken up into two. So the control plane portion and the declarative nodes portion. So there are two different PRs open now. We actually have two different people kind of driving those efforts. Chris Rousey from our end is really heads down on the control plane portion, which I think is what you're more interested in. So he's opened a PR to start fresh, but I don't know if he's rolled those updates back into the doc. So I would just look at the PR for the most recent version, but I would expect all of that to get merged back into the doc. And to just comment on the fact that they've been committed. I don't know if you said that in like a scary way, like, oh my God, things are finally getting committed and I didn't even have a chance to comment, but we deliberately left the PRs open so that people can leave inline comments, but we checked the code in slightly different locations just to start prototyping the reconciling code to get even better feedback about like the shape of the API and what are all the edge cases we have to cover. But it's not actually set in stone just because it's merged. It's just to make it easier to get even more feedback by writing code against it.
Yeah, cool. I'll definitely take a look and see if something, well, if my earlier comments have been addressed, and otherwise have a review round more. Yeah, so to the larger group, we're aiming to like consolidate or unify the Kubernetes API somewhat, at least, with the cluster API, the control plane portion. So basically, we'll define, I think it's going to be that we're defining a Kubernetes API that will be the control plane spec, right? Robert, is that somewhat what you thought? And then the cluster API, the like larger scope cluster API will embed the Kubernetes like structs.
Yeah, so I think ideally we would have very close parity, if not identical API definitions for the control plane between the cluster API and kubeadmin. I'm not sure how close we are to that today. Like I know you've got sort of a straw man API for kubeadmin, and Chris has a first PR for cluster API, and I don't think they're quite the same yet. So I think that's where we'd really like some of your feedback on sort of the direction of the API that Chris is working on to start pushing it towards kubeadmin. And I think there are likely some sort of requirements that you know about that we don't know about yet, and sort of vice versa, right? So I think that's where we'd really like to collaborate on that.
Sounds really good, yeah. At best, the Kubernetes API will still be Alpha 2 in like a better version of Alpha with Alpha quality in 1.9. We'll see, but like thanks to this effort, but still we have to keep in mind, like when saying that the Kubernetes API is Alpha, we're meaning that we'll change it backwards incompatibly, but still no users are stuck. So we will handle the upgrade and transition seamlessly. So it's like a beta API. If you start using it today, you will use it. You can use it as a beta API, but it's Alpha due to the strict like regulations on how you can name your API.
Yeah, I think we're calling it Alpha because we reserve the right to make incompatible changes, even if we're not sure if we will.
Yeah, exactly. So then, anything more there?
I guess just one more pitch if anybody's interested in sort of diving deeper into this. There is a breakout meeting tomorrow at 11 a.m. Pacific time to specifically talk about the cluster API stuff. So I think we'll sort of continue to give sort of brief updates during this meeting, but for more details, please join the other meeting. All right, 4DNS is next.
Oh, Chris, were you about to say something? Okay. Let me see. So yeah, do we have anyone from CoreDNS here at the moment? Okay. Well, just a heads up that CoreDNS, the proposal was merged into the community repo yesterday or some days ago, which is great to see progress. We have the PR up as well. I'll take a look at it in the coming days. Just that, well, it would be great to have even more reviewers on it. In case you have something we definitely should get right with DNS this time. Worth mentioning is that we have 3 kind of conflicting PRs that touch DNS code in Kubernetes right now. We have this core DNS thing. We have a PR that lets you specify the DNS IP explicitly from like a field in the Kubernetes API to the DNS specs, the service. And third is like the way we calculate the way we calculate the DNS IP as is now is basically taking the master's, well, the API server's internal IP, which is often like 10.96.0.1 in like all happy cases, and just append a zero to that one. So, which is not great. We should obviously be using a proper parsing library and just allocate the 10th IP of that subnet or element it might be. But
and there's a PR to do that exactly.
Yeah,
right.
exactly. So we have these 3 PRs touching the same code. We need to get some. I mean, I know we discussed this a month ago or something, but we still have to make a final call on what way to go. CoreDNS is going in, and is kind of orthogonal to the DNS IP issue, but still they are related in some ways.
Does anyone have a link to that parsing pull request? Because I need to do like the exact same thing for the operator. Like I need to append like 20 or something. So it'd be great if it wasn't in my change set, which is already quite large.
Well, yeah, I'll dig it up. There's an IP allocator package that is used elsewhere in Kubernetes as well for doing it. Yeah, I'll check. Any other comments, like what the best route forward? I mean, as we said last time, I think component config would be the, well, ideal goal. But I don't know if the SIG network is working on, well, component config for kubedns.
As far as I know, they are not. I can go poke a couple people and see where that is on their backlog.
Just a small update with DNS. So with 1.8 kubeadm, we can't deploy the DNS deployment before CNI is created, right? But now that we have that new feature gate in 1.9, we can actually deploy the DNS server before CNI, I think. So, but in order to get that to work, I think we need to deploy it on the host network with like the DNS policy as like cluster first with hostnet or something like that. So my question is that something that's okay to deploy the DNS server on the hostnet, or do we want like stronger separation there? It's not something that we need to answer now, just something to think about if we do want the deployment to actually be deployed pre-CNI.
I don't think it's even possible for it to be pre-CNI, because it must not be on the host network, right? Right now, for it to have a pod IP and a routable service IP.
But it can.
Well, if it would be on the host network, it would be.
Because like it gets a service IP, right, which doesn't need CNI. So the kubelet refers to the service IP. So as long as the kube proxy is running, it basically assigns it a service IP which points to it, which could be like whatever.
Yeah.
I think.
But still, if it can schedule before CNI is there, it needs to be on the host network anyway, which would mean the pod IP would be the master IP plus something, the ports that it opens. So I don't think we want to open ports, DNS ports on the master.
You could put it on any port though, because the service can change the ports to 53.
Right. I mean, because like we're doing it with a lot of control plane components right now, right? So we're running it on the host network. So,
yeah. I'm not sure I'm a fan of running it on the master's host network due to like scaling and things later. But anyway, yeah, let's take that async. Anything else? So, Robert, if you thought that it's not in the works right now, so one of the issues with CoreDNS, the migration here, is because kubedns doesn't follow component config, there is no easy way to migrate to core DNS. And the proposal was merged in an alpha state, which means that there is no upgrade guidelines for existing users that are using the kubedns config map for whatever. It's for federation and something, like if you want to use it to delegate to other external DNS servers and things like that, advanced functionality.
Is federation stuff all alpha though, right?
Yeah, but like, well, the config map itself is beta, yes.
But if the federation features are alpha, then those guys probably haven't thought too much about the upgrade scenario.
No, but the general, let me see if I can. So you can, with the kubedns config map, you can today specify third-party DNS servers to forward specific requests to. Have you seen there was a blog post as well somewhere, Kubernetes blog about this.
I haven't, but I think I've heard of that feature, so I roughly know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so, but anyway, there is such a feature, and it's, well, here we go. Private DNS zones and upstream name servers in Kubernetes. Chat there. It was in April. So in 4.1.6, I think this thing was made. So, well, so one of the things there was it follows some kind of scheme nobody knows really. What is, like, just something they came up with, and this is now like beta or higher availability. So in order to upgrade for users to core DNS, we have to do this kind of migration. I think we definitely should, as we have to do some kind of breaking change, we definitely should opt in for component configuration at the same time when doing this thing. Just want to make sure SIG network is like aware of it at least, or something.
Okay, it sounds like maybe we should have you and maybe somebody else jump on the SIG networking call and ask them a couple of questions. I don't know how much the SIG networking folks are interested in supporting cross grades between core DNS and kubedns and getting complete feature parity between the two. They might just say, if you're using kubedns, then you get some of these features, and if you're using core DNS, you don't. And we aren't trying to get direct compatibility between, like, feature parity between the two.
Yeah.
Or support every possible scenario about switching back and forth.
Yeah.
And that's also the ball's a little bit in CoreOS's court. If they want to promote core DNS as, you know, a full replacement for kubedns, then they should also be aiming for feature parity.
So I think core DNS is feature pair and better performance and things like that. But it was just that the proposal was merged in an alpha state, that it didn't consider upgrades. And if you're using these features in kubedns and want to upgrade, you have to, like, there is no automated way, right? For KubeADM, this is actually not a problem, because our users doesn't use the config map, so we can just go with the default core DNS files as well. But
well, our users might use the config map, right? Because they can install a cluster and then after the fact go and add this config map manually to add in name servers, right?
Yeah, of course, if they do it by themselves. But yeah, I mean, we should definitely check with SIG network and component config there. The last points here are on component config as well, like kubelet, kubeproxy, kubescheduler. I'm keeping an eye on these ones. And SIG network wants to add IPv6 functionality to kubeADM in 1.9. That requires kubeproxy component configuration supporting kubeADM. I'm actively looking into this area. This is something we definitely should get in. Also, as discussed earlier, Mike Torfen is working on the kubelet dynamic config and things like that. So, as a consequence,
I thought kubeproxy already used component config.
Yes, but it's moving to its own like API group, and we basically want to kill the grand component config, everything into the same place.
Okay,
API groups.
so it's more of a sideways shift then. Like it has the feature we need now. We just don't want to keep updating the main API group.
Yeah, and also, but it was some discussions on, like in the Slack channels that, well, we have some alpha functionalities here, like IPv4, things like that. Yeah, well, just a heads up, because this is something we should get in for 1.9. At least SIG Network is committed to helping with it. Yeah, and Tim, did you know of any final call for etcd 3.1 or 3.2?
There's no formalized testing to go from 3.0 to 3.2, and I don't want to be the guinea pig. So I think if we do a stage release to 3.1 and then next release go to 3.2, there's no issues with 3.1, but there are kind of edge cases. One of the edge cases that we know about is if you start rolling down, if you quickly roll down members from a high availability cluster, you'll run into an issue. That's one of the issues. There's also a fix that Jordan had posted that exists in 3.2 with a read deadlock condition that only occurs on high scale clusters. So I think we're kind of okay for the most part for these two conditions. But ideally, we'd want to get past this point quickly. There might be a potential way to say like fresh clusters get 3.2 and then upgrade clusters get 3.1, but that means we'd have to manage it.
I was going to ask about that. I think at some point we are going to have to more actively manage etcd versions and not just strictly tie them to Kubernetes versions. But I don't know if now is the time to bite that off.
I don't want to be the guinea pig. The testing cycles that exist inside the mainline repository are a way we qualify the exact versions of etcd, because usually you get a ton of testing cycles and the scale tests alone produce a number of interesting issues, right? And I don't want to be in the boat of having to validate a foreign version that has not gone through the rigors, right?
Yeah, I agree. I was just saying, like, if we do validate etcd 3.2 and we're at 3.0, we should figure out a way to upgrade people from 3.0 to 3.2, even if it requires 2 upgrade steps, right? And not strictly tie that to Kubernetes release versions and say we have to wait 3 months to get up to 3.2. I know in GKE we at some point in the past divorced etcd versions from Kubernetes versions, and it's been nice because it allowed us to upgrade to etcd 3, not at the same time as you're upgrading Kubernetes, a minor version, which is always tricky anyway, and that made the transition a lot smoother. So I think we're at some point going to want to take that same approach for kubeadmin. I'm not sure if we're quite to the point where it's required yet, though.
And I know, like, speaking for COPS, I would love to collaborate on the upgrade procedure. It has been a bugbear for a long time.
Yeah, I'm so Robert. Now on the plane home from London, I wrote, well, a total fresh actually kubeadmin upgrade proposal that has been sitting for too many months without like me having time to rewrite it. Yeah, and in that I state that, well, before going to GA with kubeadmin upgrade, we have to somehow take etcd into account. Which we don't do now. So yeah, I think definitely that kubeadmin upgrade etcd or something, kubeadmin upgrade -- component etcd or whatever, something that would do it out of bandwidth minor releases would be great. If we have to do it with a minor release, it might be an option, but hopefully not.
Right now, with the way we're upgrading upstream, going with the minor release process, it's just in place modifications. So there's no changes. So if you go from 3.0.10 or 3.0 whatever, I think it was 3.0.17 to 3.1.10, there's no there's no upgrade path other than switching the component. And internally, there will be some minor changes, but that you won't see them, right? They'll be transparent to you. It's only when they break data models that, and they've sworn that not to do that again, that it will have it. And apparently in 3.3, there's supposed to be a rollback feature too. So.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, eventually we should start running the scale tests ourselves, right? So we talked about this in an issue as well. Robert also chimed in, I think. Basically, we should move over CubeMark and the density tests of CubeUp right now to use KubeADM, probably with the cluster API, some implementation there. And then if we have then the cluster API and it's somewhat easy to run it with that, we can have the community actually run the scale tests as well. Right now, they're kind of opaque to most persons in the community, like what actually happens in these suits.
I would like to be more bold and state, like, when are we going to actually bite the bullet and shoot KubeUp? Because it's deprecated formally, right? And we've said that we're not maintaining it or adding features to it. But is Google going to commit to starting to pivot over? Or
that's the cluster API, right?
Yeah, so two things there. So one, we had already started pivoting end-to-end tests over. So we started running more end-to-end tests on kubeadmin plus Kubernetes Anywhere. I think there's a little bit of concern that Kubernetes Anywhere is sort of turning into KubeUp with the number of configuration parameters that you have to set to make it go. So it's not necessarily sort of clearly better. And so we sort of halted the path of moving stuff over as we work on the cluster API. And the intent is to move stuff off of KubeUp onto the cluster API once we have an implementation that we can start using for testing. So basically at this point, we're not actively getting stuff off KubeUp anymore because we're heads down on the cluster API stuff. Once that's to a point where it can create clusters that we can run end-to-end tests against, then we can start migrating tests over to that and use that for test infra on GC.
Well, that helps a lot. That might be motivation for us to help somehow.
Excellent. Yeah, any motivation is good.
Yeah, that's a grand plan, which is exciting because we can start removing things. Well, so what I did some days or weeks before the 1.8 release, I started going through the different kinds of guides we have. I mean, this is just in the Kubernetes website repo, we have a lot of docs that haven't been updated in like a year. We should, it's on us, right, to go through these things, ping the maintainers, and remove. I mean, maybe even deprecate things first and then remove the next minor cycle. But yeah, I mean, it's currently leading our users to bad solutions that doesn't necessarily even work anymore. I don't know if there's any action, like if there's someone that would like to work on that here in this room right now. Well, we should at least have it in our planning doc or something. See if someone gets to it sometime. Otherwise, yeah, checkpointing. Sorry.
Just a PSA that the doc for the docs has been pushed to the community repo. Everything has been changed from checkpointing to bootstrap checkpointing. I will need to re-rev some of the names that are inside there because I still kept them as checkpoint, but upon further discussion, everything will be renamed to bootstrap checkpointing to remove any ambiguity whatsoever. And I should have an update for the PR soonish. I went through Yuju's proposed changes and I addressed all the comments that were in the existing PR. So I should have a push this week, and I'll follow up with Yuju later on this week to get review bandwidth on those things.
Yeah, and thank you, Dims, for adding things in into the agenda. Obviously, yeah. So all our CI tests are broken at master, and we should fix that. We know the root cause. It's well, not surprisingly, CNI. We should. Well, we last Thursday or something, we merged the PR to move to CNI 060, and yeah, it made Kubernetes tester's head go completely red. Well, yeah, I actually tested locally, and it seemed to work. So it might be a packaging issue more than actually a CNI issue. However, things are red due to that PR. So whether it is a CNI issue, like something with networking, or if it's well, just the basal deb was wrongly produced with the new CNI version or something like that, we need someone to, well, fix it. I think Feng was starting to look into it. Robert, right?
Sorry, mute button. Yeah, he started to look at it and suggested rolling back the PR that broke it, and said that you'd rather roll forward, that he wasn't sure if you actually had a fix yet. It seems safer to roll back and let the test go green again while we figure out the fix, so that other stuff doesn't break in the meantime, unless we think we can get a fix done really, really quickly.
I would still hold on a forward fix. I suspect it's a packaging issue, but I don't have any fix, but yet. But could he just spin up like Kubernetes anywhere and do the thing that a cluster would like the job would do, and see what's wrong there? I mean, it said something like loopback isn't available on the node or something.
Yeah, the other thing that was mentioned is we have support for other network implementations. So we might consider switching, to Flannel or Calico or something to get tests working if they support the new CNI provider, while the Weave one gets fixed. I think it was the Weave one that wasn't working.
Well, I think Flannel broke too. Let's see.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. He wasn't sure if the other ones were working, but it's possible if one of the other ones is already working with the new CNI provider, we could switch to that temporarily just to get our test running green while we fix the other network provider.
So I think the problem was that the bump broke both Flannel and Weave. So
yeah, I mean, I think the point is if we don't have a short ETA to a fix, we should roll it back, because otherwise we're just going to stay in a broken state until somebody gets around to fixing it. And if it's not the top priority for someone, it's not going to get done very quickly.
Okay, I'll look into it in the coming days, like if not tomorrow, on Thursday. And if I can't produce a fix, then I'll roll back on Thursday. Is that okay?
As long as we're okay being broken for 2 more days.
Well, it has been broken already 3.
Sure.
Okay. Let's close this meeting and start this Kubernetes adoption working group. Right? Bye, everyone.